Ever feel like your money just vanishes? You're working hard, but it's like you're not really making any progress towards your goals, you know?
Don't tell me about it.
It can be so frustrating. Today, we're diving into something that might help. Zero-based budgeting.
Ah, yes. It's all about taking control.
But starting from zero with every expense? I mean, wouldn't that take forever?
It definitely takes a different approach. Think of it like a financial fresh start. Instead of just rolling over what you did last year, you're giving every dollar a job to do.
So it's not just about saving money, it's about, like, intentionally spending it.
Exactly. And that's the power of it. Zero-based budgeting. Or we can call it ZBB for short.
ZBB, I like it.
It's making those conscious choices about where your money's going rather than letting it just slip away.
I read that it actually has a pretty interesting history going way back to the 70s.
Yeah, you're right. It was developed by Peter Peer over at Texas Instruments.
Texas Instruments? Wow.
And even President Jimmy Carter used it, believe it or not, for government budgeting. You'd think with a history like that, it'd be way more popular now.
You'd think so. So why isn't everyone doing it?
Well, one reason, and the article cites a Deloitte survey on this, they're actually predicting a decline in the use of ZBB.
Really?
Globally, yeah. Some say it's too time-consuming or complex, especially for bigger companies. But for us regular folks, I think it's just a lot of people don't really know how it works or how to even get started.
Okay, well, let's break it down then. The article mentions some key principles of ZBB. What are they?
It boils down to three main things. You start from zero. You justify every single expense, and then you make absolutely sure your spending is actually matching up with your goals.
So it's really about actively deciding where your money's going.
You got it. It's not about being passive and letting things slip through the cracks.
Let's talk about that starting from zero idea. Does that really mean every time we budget, we just toss out the old one?
No, not exactly. It's more about approaching your budget every time with a fresh perspective, like you're seeing it for the first time. You're not letting past spending habits or what you assume you should be spending control you. It's your chance to reevaluate and really decide what you want.
So it's less about ignoring past spending and more about using it to make, well, smarter decisions for the future.
Yes, exactly. Let's say you've always spent a certain amount on entertainment each month.
Right.
With ZBB, you ask yourself, do I really need to be spending this much? You know, is this actually making me happy? Could I use this money better somewhere else?
It makes you really think about it.
It does.
So the big difference between this and, like, traditional budgeting is that you're actively making decisions instead of potentially just funding things out of habit.
You got it. Traditional budgeting can sometimes lead to what's called incrementalism. It's where you just tack on a bit here, a bit there, without actually checking if you even need those expenses anymore.
And those little bits, they add up, don't they?
Oh, for sure.
Like death by 1,000 paper cuts, but for your bank account.
That's a great way to put it. ZBB makes you really look at those cuts and decide consciously where you want your money to go.
So what are the benefits then? I know the article lists a bunch, but I'm guessing cost reduction is probably number one.
Yeah, definitely. But it's not just about cutting costs for the sake of cutting costs.
Right.
It's about being strategic. Like the article gives this example of, say you have marketing campaigns that aren't really performing well. Well, with ZBB, you would take those funds and move them to, high ROI channels, the ones that are actually working.
So it's more about optimizing. Like spending smarter, not just spending less.
Exactly. ZBB is all about finding those areas where you can be more efficient with your money and making sure every dollar is actually working hard for you to reach your goals.
Almost like giving your money a performance review.
I like that. Because you're basically asking, is this expense really earning its keep?
It makes sense. Which leads us to that next benefit, right? Strategic resource allocation, as the article calls it.
Right. It makes you think about, what are my real priorities? How can I use my resources, time and money, both, to actually reach them?
It's like being the CEO of your own finances, making those big decisions about where to invest.
Exactly. Whether your goal is early retirement, paying off that debt, or even just saving for that dream vacation, ZBB gives you that roadmap to get there.
And speaking of roadmaps, the article gives a step-by-step guide to implementing ZBB.
It does.
Let's break that down so our listeners can actually see how this works in real life. What's the first step?
Well, the first thing you have to do is identify what are called your decision units.
Decision units.
Yeah, it's just a fancy way of saying categories of expenses, like for individuals, be things like housing, transportation, food, all that.
So pretty similar to the categories you'd see in a regular budget.
Yeah, pretty much. But with ZBB, we're going to get a lot more detailed and really think through these categories.
Okay, I've got those categories all figured out. What's next?
Now you create what are called decision packages.
Decision packages.
Yeah.
What are those?
Basically, they're like mini proposals for each expense within a category. It outlines the cost and the benefit of that expense.
I'm seeing now how this could get really detailed. So like if housing is one of my categories, I might have one package for my mortgage payment, another for utilities, and then maybe even one for like home maintenance.
Exactly. And each package should make you really stop and think, do I really need this expense? How does it actually help me reach my overall financial goals?
So it's not just listing things out, it's justifying them too.
Exactly. This step is where ZBB gets really powerful. You move beyond just tracking your money and start making actual choices about it.
All right, so I've got my decision units figured out. I've made those decision packages with all the justifications. Now what?
Okay, this is the part some people find a bit challenging. You have to rank and prioritize those packages. This is where you gotta make those tough decisions about what you're gonna fund and what you might have to cut.
Oh, I bet. So this is where the rubber really meets the road.
Exactly. And this is where your own values and goals become super important. Like, if your top priority is saving for a down payment on a house, that package might get ranked higher than, say, your entertainment or dining out categories.
I'm starting to get it. It's a way to help you make those tough decisions, huh?
It is.
So what's the final step in this whole ZBB process?
The final step is to put a review and approval process in place. That's super important for accountability.
So even though it's our own personal finances, we've got to have some kind of system to make sure we're staying on track.
Exactly. So for an individual, that might mean regularly reviewing their budget, maybe with a partner, financial advisor, or even just having a good, honest check-in with themselves.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And how often should we be reviewing? Like, is there a set schedule?
It really depends on you. Monthly, quarterly, even annually. Whatever works best for your situation.
This is pretty cool. I'm starting to see the appeal of this whole ZBB thing. It's like it takes all the good stuff from traditional budgeting, but adds this layer of really thinking about your choices. This seems way more powerful.
And that's what makes it so effective. It's not about restricting yourself, it's about being in control. It's about taking your money and using it to create a life that actually matches what you want and what you value.
This has been, wow, really eye-opening. But before we go any further, how does this actually work for our listeners? Where do they even begin?
That's a great question. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into in the next part of our deep dive. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of how to apply ZBB to your own finances, with some practical tips to help you get started.
Welcome back to our deep dive. So we've talked about the history and ideas behind zero-based budgeting, but now, how can our listeners actually use this ZBB to make their finances better?
Right, that's the big question. The good news is you don't have to do the whole ZBB thing all at once. You can just, try a few of the key ideas and still see a big difference.
Okay, phew, that's a relief. Honestly, when we were talking about those decision packages and all that, I kind of started to feel overwhelmed. Like, where would someone even begin?
You know, a good place to start is just pick maybe one or two spending categories that feel, I don't know, maybe a little out of control, or where you think you might be spending too much. And then you apply that ZBB idea of justification.
So be my own financial detective.
Yeah.
And really ask myself the hard questions about how I'm spending my money.
Yes. Ask yourself, do I really need this? Does this fit with my goals, or could I use this money better somewhere else?
I can see how just changing how you think about it could make a big difference. Instead of just, mindlessly spending, you have to stop and think, wait a minute, do I actually need this?
Exactly. And you might be surprised what you find. Maybe there are subscriptions you're not even using, or those recurring expenses you totally forgot about.
It's like finding those hidden leaks in your budget.
Haha, yeah. And once you've found those places where you can save, then think about how to use that money to reach your goals. Maybe it's paying off debt faster, or building up your emergency fund, or even finally starting to invest.
So it's not just about saving, it's about saving strategically and using those savings to actually make progress towards your goals.
Absolutely. Which brings us back to another big principle of ZBB, making sure your spending and your goals are on the same page.
Okay, this is where I think a lot of people get stuck. It's easy to say, I want to save more money, but how do you actually do it? How do you turn that into decisions?
The first thing is to be really clear about what you want to achieve financially. And I don't mean vague stuff. I mean specific, measurable goals. Do you want to buy a house? Start a business? Retire early?
So those big goals then become what drive all your budget choices.
Yes. Once you have those goals, then for every spending decision, you ask yourself, does this help me get to my goal or does it hold me back? So if you're dreaming of traveling the world, maybe you cut back on eating out and put more money into a travel savings account instead.
So your budget is like a map to get you from where you are now to where you want to be financially.
That's a great way to put it. And it can be really motivating because you're not just budgeting to save money, you're budgeting to create the life you want.
I like that. So we've talked about justifying expenses and making sure our spending matches our goals. Any other practical tips for using ZBB?
One thing that can help is to break down those big spending categories into smaller ones with more detail.
So instead of just having food as a category, I might have like groceries, dining out, takeout, maybe even coffee or snacks.
Exactly. The more detail you have, the more you'll understand your spending habits, and that helps you find those sneaky areas where you might be overspending without even realizing it.
It's like using a microscope for your budget.
Haha, great analogy. It's about getting really close with your finances and knowing exactly where your money's going.
The article also mentioned that a big part of ZBB is reviewing and adjusting your budget regularly. Why is that?
Well, life's always changing, right? And your budget has to be flexible enough to change with it. What worked for you last year might not be the best thing this year.
So it's not just something you set up once and forget about.
Nope, definitely not. It's about checking in with yourself maybe every month, every few months, to see if your budget still fits your goals and what's important to you.
Because, like we've been saying, ZBB is about making conscious choices.
Right. So maybe you got a raise and you can put more money towards savings. Or maybe you had an unexpected expense and you need to adjust your spending in other areas.
It's about staying in control and making sure your budget is actually helping you, not working against you.
Exactly. Your budget should be like a living thing that changes along with you and your life. It's a tool. It's not a set of strict rules.
We've been talking about all the good stuff with ZBB, but gotta be real, there must be some challenges too, right? Like the article mentions that it can be pretty time-consuming, maybe even a bit overwhelming, especially at first. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, you're right. It does take some effort, for sure. But there are ways to make it easier. One is to start small. You don't have to change everything at once. Just pick one or two categories and go from there.
So it's about building those habits and making it something you can keep doing, rather than trying to be perfect right away.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to use technology. There are so many apps and tools out there that can help you track your spending and do the math for you.
That's where something like the digital budget planner from DigyKeys could be helpful.
Totally.
Yeah.
A good budget planner can make a huge difference with the ZBB. It just streamlines the whole process and helps you stay organized.
Okay, cool. I remember the article also mentioned that ZBB can sometimes make people focus too much on the short term. How do we avoid that?
That's a good point. It's easy to get so focused on cutting costs right now that we forget about our long-term goals. That's why it's super important to always keep those goals in mind when you're looking at your expenses.
So when I'm tempted to buy something I don't really need, I should stop and think, will this help me reach my long-term goals, or is it just a quick thrill?
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, enjoying life now, but also planning for the future.
And one last thing the article mentioned, sometimes people just resist change, even if it's good for them. That can be a big hurdle for ZBB.
Oh yeah, it's true. Change is hard, especially with our finances. But you don't have to do it alone.
So if someone's listening and they're feeling a little overwhelmed, what advice would you give them?
I'd say first, be patient with yourself. This is a journey. It's not a race. Every little step counts. And second, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Like help from a financial advisor or a partner or even just a friend who's also trying to get their finances in order.
Exactly. Having someone to support you and keep you accountable makes a world of difference. And remember, lots of people have used these ZBB principles, and it's really changed their financial lives. You can do it too.
God, this has been so helpful, seriously. It's like ZBB is more than just budgeting. It's a whole new way of thinking about your money.
You got it. And you know what? In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to talk about something that a lot of people don't even realize is connected to ZBB, the impact it can have on your overall well-being.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been really digging into zero-based budgeting and how it can, help you get a handle on your money. But there's something else we haven't talked about yet, something that's kind of a hidden benefit, how it affects your well-being, like your whole self.
Yeah, that's a great point. We tend to think about budgeting as just, numbers and spreadsheets, but it's really not. It goes way deeper than that. It's about getting your money to match up with what you really care about, your values and priorities. And that can really change how you feel mentally and emotionally.
Okay, I'm curious. Tell me more about this connection between my budget and my well-being.
Well, think about it. When you're always stressed about money, feeling like you're barely getting by or like you're drowning in debt, it's hard to be happy.
It's like that money stress just hangs over everything.
Exactly. But when you take control of your money, when you make a plan and you start seeing progress, it gives you a sense of peace, like things are okay. And that feeling spreads into all parts of your life.
So it's not just about having more money, it's about having more peace of mind.
You got it. And when you have peace of mind, you sleep better, you're less anxious, and you just feel more positive about, well, everything.
That makes a lot of sense, like a weight lifted off your shoulders. So how does ZBB specifically do that? How does it help with well-being?
Well, remember those key principles we talked about, starting from zero, justifying everything you spend, and making sure it all aligns with your goals. Doing those things, just by themselves, can be incredibly empowering.
Because you're the one making the choices about your money. It's not just like disappearing on you anymore.
Exactly. You're not just watching your financial life happen, you're in the driver's seat. You're making decisions that shape your future.
That's a pretty powerful shift, isn't it?
It is. And it goes way beyond just your bank account. When you really start paying attention to your spending, you also start noticing what actually makes you happy.
So ZBB can help you figure out what's really important to you, not just with money, but in all areas of your life.
That's right. And when your spending reflects those values, you feel good about it. There's a sense of purpose, like you're not just buying stuff, you're investing in things that matter to you.
So your budget becomes a reflection of you, the real you.
I love that. It's about finding that alignment between your money and your values. And that can be really freeing.
I bet. And the article also mentioned that ZBB can, help reduce financial stress and anxiety, which makes sense, I guess, if you're more in control.
Oh, it's a huge benefit. When you have a clear plan, you don't have to constantly worry about money.
It's like knowing you have a safety net, so you're more free to take risks, try new things, or just enjoy life more.
Exactly. You're not held back by those fears and worries anymore.
This has been great, seriously.
Yeah.
Exploring ZBB with you has really opened my eyes. It's so much more than just a way to budget. It's like a whole different way of looking at your finances.
You got it. It can really be life-changing. And remember, it all starts with taking that first step. Even just trying out a few of those ZBB principles can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. For anyone who's feeling inspired, definitely check out the DigyKeys article we've been talking about. It's full of good info and helpful tips.
And their digital budget planner, that can be a great tool too. It can help you get organized and stay on track.
For sure. Well, this is the end of our deep dive into zero-based budgeting, but I hope this conversation continues for everyone listening. It's not just about money. It's about creating a life that's more fulfilling and intentional.
Thanks for joining us.
And we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.